Hi, my name is Hexa and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be getting into my experience living with anxiety and agoraphobia, how I got here, how it affects my life, and how my anxiety issues kind of started. This is a topic that I have avoided going too far into for a long time because I want to be more than just my mental illness. I don't want to be known as the mentally ill girl. But at the same time, through my experience of living with this disorder, I've realized that there are very few people who actually know what agoraphobia is, and there are huge gaps of awareness, understanding, and support. So I want to talk openly about this because I think it's important for people to know what it is, for people to take it seriously, and hopefully for people with agoraphobia to receive more support and understanding from those around them. This video is going to be posted to two separate YouTube channels, my main channel, Hexa Angel, as well as 365 Days Brave, which is kind of a channel slash project that I started a few years ago and haven't really kept up with. The idea behind 365 Days Brave was it was meant to document my progress of recovering from anxiety. It was going to be about trying new things, being more outgoing, and having more fun, as well as just challenging myself to face and to confront my fears. There is more to me than my mental illness, and I didn't want my anxiety stuff to just take over my entire main channel, and so that's why I created 365 Days Brave as a space for me to explore that topic and document that journey. That being said, if you're watching this on my main channel and you want to learn more about my anxiety recovery journey, then go ahead and subscribe to 365 Days Brave. And if you're watching this on 365 Days Brave and you want to see more content on other important things in my life like creativity, cozy living, my decluttering journey, and just my pursuit of a creative, self-employed, and meaningful life, then go ahead and subscribe to Hexa Angel. Before I really get into the video, I do want to make a trigger warning because I am going to be talking about mental health, phobias, self-harm, depression, and other pretty heavy topics, so just be aware of that. And I will also be looking down at my notes a lot because there's a lot to cover and I just don't want to miss anything important. So let's get into this video. It's gonna be a fun one. Starting off nice and light, not heavy at all, with my mental health history. Fun times. So anxiety was definitely not the first mental health struggle that I have ever had. I've definitely been plagued with a lot of stuff. I've always had a complicated mental health history. It started off with just feeling very lonely and not having a lot of friends in my early childhood. I was always just kind of a weird kid and people didn't really like me. I remember having some not very serious but nevertheless suicidal thoughts, even as early as like age 10. In my pre-teen, tween sort of years, my life was very unstable due to my parents getting divorced and a new sister, and we moved from China, where we were living at the time, back to Romania, back to China, all within the space of 1 year. I started, you know, in a new school, new house, new friends, all of that. It was a very tumultuous period in my life, and it was like right on that cusp of like kind of starting puberty and where things naturally tend to get a little bit difficult for teenagers. And then throughout my teen years, I struggled heavily with depression, self-harm, and an eating disorder. And then around age 18 or 19, my depression took a bit of a back seat. I got better, I was a little happier, but it didn't last because it was very quickly replaced by an anxiety disorder, which is the same thing that I'm continuing to struggle with now at the age of almost 27. I'm turning 27 in March, which, like, wow, rude. But also, I never expected to reach this age. If you had asked me, like, during my deepest, darkest depression when I was like 14 to 16, if I thought I would even make it to the age that I am now, I don't think I would have thought that I would make it. I went through some really, really dark times, but I got through them mostly through stubbornness and just, I knew that, like, if I killed myself, maybe there would be a few people, specifically some teachers who made my life a living hell, who would feel guilty about it for about 5 minutes, but then move on and the world would keep on turning and I would just be gone, and I couldn't stomach that. I wanted to stick around. I wanted to try to succeed. I wanted to try to make my dreams come true. Hasn't happened yet, but I still thoroughly and strongly believe that it will happen eventually. So yeah, that kind of just sheer stubbornness and force of will got me through my darkest years, and now I'm here. So that's a brief summary of my mental health history. Now getting into where I was in life right before my anxiety started. So at the time I was about 16 or 17. I was living in Shanghai. I was a singer, I was a social butterfly, I was very outgoing, I was really active in different communities, especially the performance arts community and the queer community in Shanghai. I was always at events or just gallivanting around the city. I was in a couple of different bands. I was never home. I was very much an out of control teenager. My mom was like at her wit's end with me. I thought I was having fun. I thought I was just like coming out of my shell and like getting to know myself. But at the same time, I was still deeply depressed. I was really neglectful of myself and my body. I was dealing with self-harm. I was dealing with an eating disorder. I wasn't eating, I was drinking. I just had no self-care habits whatsoever. I was really just like escaping my inner darkness by being around people all the time and putting on like a fun, outgoing party animal persona. But inside, I was really, really suffering, despite the fact that on the outside, it seemed like I was just a really fun, bubbly, exciting person. So then we get into the early beginnings of my anxiety disorder. When I was 18 or so, I stopped drinking so much. I was never like drinking really heavily. I was never like an alcoholic or anything, but I was definitely going out a lot. And since I was so skinny and also a lightweight, like it did not take much for me to be drunk, and it was very much like a coping mechanism. But I realized that alcohol was having just very unpredictable effects on my mental health. I could never know if it was going to be a good night or a bad night, and I just also didn't like how it made me behave. I didn't like the person that I was kind of becoming under the influence of alcohol. I don't think I made like a conscious decision to stop drinking, but I just like slowly phased it out. So around 18, I was not drinking that much anymore. I kept doing all the things I was doing, you know, the socializing and the performing and the going out and all of that stuff, but I started prioritizing my self-care a little bit more and like eating more, gaining a little bit of weight, which at the time like I really, really needed. My depression started getting better. I got into the first healthy romantic relationship of my life. I was working for like a couple hours a day as an English tutor, and I was making really good money for my age and like total lack of work experience. I was making like $275 a week, which was huge for me. So around the time I was 18, there was about a 6-month period where the depression was basically gone, the anxiety hadn't hit yet, and I was just kind of content and at peace, and I was having fun like a normal young person without all these self-destructive habits. But unfortunately, this very happy and kind of peaceful, wholesome time in my life was not to last. It was towards the end of 2016 that my anxiety slowly started creeping in, and then by the spring of 2017, when I had turned 19, I was basically housebound. By November of 2017, my relationship fell apart, and I've pretty much just been trying and failing to get control of my anxiety ever since. I want to talk about some warning signs in my early childhood that we missed, which should have kind of hinted that I had a tendency towards anxiety and that this would potentially become a problem for me at some point. And there's two major events that come to mind. The first event was choir camp. So this was around the time that I was like 8 or 9 years old. When I was a kid, I was pretty close with my mom and very like dependent on my mom, and you know, I slept in my mom's bed in her room until pretty late, I would say, like around the time I was 12 or so. And around the time I was 8 or 9 years old, I went on a 10-day trip to Austria with my school's choir. I was in the school choir. It was very prestigious, and we had an opportunity to sing with the Vienna Boys Choir, and we would like spend 10 days in Austria just like singing and learning music and doing different camping activities. We were staying in a hotel, and I had just like a small bed next to a wall, and most of the time I slept on my right side facing the rest of the room, but one night I turned over onto my left side, and when I slept in my mom's bed, I was on the right and my mom was on the left. And so in that moment, I turned onto my left side in my bed in this hotel, and came face to face with just like a wall where my mom should have been. Wow, I didn't think I would get emotional. Why am I getting emotional? This is ridiculous. But anyway. So it suddenly hit me that like where my mom was supposed to be, there was just a wall, and I became suddenly very homesick, inconsolable. I really missed my mom, and the rest of the trip was really difficult. I wouldn't eat, I couldn't sleep very well. I just wanted my mom back. It was only a 10-day trip, you know, and so a few days after this happened, like I was back with my mom and everything should have been fine. But honestly, I think that night, or that like realization of my mom just suddenly not being there, hitting me like a ton of bricks in that moment, it was kind of like a form of trauma, which nobody realized at the time. And so that event triggered a period of, I'm not sure how long, it could have been just a few months or like a year or two, where I became convinced that if I didn't sleep in the same building as my mom, that my mom was gonna die. It was like this invasive, terrifying thought. So obviously sleepovers became really difficult. I was that pathetic little kid who like went on a sleepover and then couldn't fall asleep and was laying awake in my bed at night worrying that my mom was dead. It blew over eventually, and like I was eventually able to go on sleepovers and just have a nice time and be normal, but I never got therapy for it at the time, and I definitely think it was one of those like early signs of an anxious personality that should have been paid a little bit more attention to. I also think potentially there's like an element of OCD there, but I'm not gonna get into that. But definitely those invasive, irrational thoughts and fears of death were really a lot to deal with as a kid and caused a lot of fear and anxiety. The second event that should have tipped us off that anxiety was gonna be a thing with me happened around the time I was in like middle school or early high school, I think around the age of like 14 or so. I had a panic attack, which at the time I didn't realize was a panic attack. I don't think anybody realized it was a panic attack, but what had happened was a bunch of stressful events happening on the same day, which just like built up my anxiety level throughout the day until it like bubbled over into panic. So this was the series of events. On the same day, these three terrifying things happened. The first thing was, it was the first day in Shanghai where the pollution index had hit over 500. I'm not sure on which like type of measurement scale, but 500 was like off the scale. It was like unprecedented, higher than it had ever been before. So high that people previously didn't think that it could get that high. And you could see it, you could smell it. You know, you stepped out and it smelled like a barbecue and it looked like it was foggy, like you couldn't quite see through the smog. And it just triggered this like feeling of impending doom, right? I got very scared for the planet and for our future. I had this feeling of like, you know, this planet is the one place that we cannot escape from, you know? And I just felt very trapped and really concerned about how bad the pollution had gotten and why nobody was doing anything to fix it, really. Then that evening I watched the movie The Happening, which is also about like environmental horror, basically. I'm not gonna spoil the movie, but it is pretty horrifying and it definitely did not help to regulate my nervous system. And then the third thing was that for reasons which I cannot possibly understand, that day in class, our Chinese teacher chose to share with us a news story that she had read in which allegedly a little girl got into an elevator with a grandmother who had a baby in a stroller with her, and the little girl grabbed the baby out of the stroller as the grandma was getting out, took the elevator up with the baby to the top floor of the building and threw the baby out of the window, and when questioned by police said that her reasoning was that the baby didn't smile at her. So for some reason our Chinese teacher decided to tell us this story of this psychopathic child. I don't even know if it's a true news story. It could have been fake news. I don't know, but it was very real to me when our teacher told us that story. And so those three things happening on the same day just like built and built and built my feeling of stress and anxiety until I ended up having a panic attack, which again, I didn't realize was a panic attack. But I had like a really heavy feeling of just impending doom and fear, and it was just very, very visceral, and I just felt like I wanted to escape this earth and like nothing was safe. So those are some of my early experiences with anxiety and some of those signs that we missed. Now moving on to how my anxiety started and what that kind of first year or so was like. Later in the video I will be going over some of the events that I believe may have triggered my anxiety in like 2016, 2017, but honestly, I'm not 100% sure what caused it, and it's impossible to know. There are probably a lot of different factors that went into it, but to me, it felt like all those years of neglecting my body and mind came back to bite me all at once. I no longer felt safe. I started having panic attacks in the subway, which I took all the time. I was constantly on the subway, and suddenly I started getting these intrusive thoughts of getting trapped in the subway and like the doors not opening, the train not moving, and like the next train coming and crashing into us and like dying in the subway basically. So I very quickly kind of couldn't take the subway anymore. And after having those first few panic attacks, of course, you develop the fear of having more panic attacks. So you start to slowly just avoid the situations in which you had previous panic attacks until your world gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Once 2017 rolled around, health anxiety became a really, really big theme in my life. I didn't trust my body. I was super paranoid. I was sure that there was something wrong with me physically. Because the thing is, anxiety causes a lot of really scary physical symptoms, which are virtually indistinguishable from an actual, like, cardiac or neurological event. I was getting heart palpitations and a really fast heart rate. My blood pressure would get really high. I was often feeling really dizzy and lightheaded, like my brain wasn't getting enough oxygen. I would feel nauseous. I would get weird kind of like tingly sensations in my limbs and in my face. There's a reason why so many people call an ambulance when they have a panic attack. It's because it literally can feel like a heart attack or a stroke. And so for me, I stopped trusting my own body. I stopped feeling safe in my own body. I started to think that I had a brain tumor. If I got a cramp in my leg, I would think that it was a blood clot, and I would panic thinking that it would travel to my lungs or to my brain and kill me. At the time, we were still living in Shanghai, and we had a housekeeper and nanny who would come in at noon to kind of clean the house and cook and help take care of my little sister. So she was coming in at noon, and I would try to deliberately like go to bed late so that I would still be asleep by the time that she came in, because if I woke up before the housekeeper came and I was awake and aware that I was alone in the house, I would experience like an insane level of panic because I was conscious and able to have thoughts like, what if I have a medical emergency and there's nobody else at home and nobody's gonna call the ambulance for me and I'm probably just gonna like die here alone and get found hours later. I would sometimes ask my mom to call me every hour or so to check in on me to make sure I was still alive. I wouldn't take a shower if I was home alone because I developed a fear of slipping in the shower and like passing out or hitting my head or whatever. I was scared to leave the house in case I would vomit or faint in public. By spring of 2017, I pretty much would no longer leave my house for any reason other than to go to doctor's appointments, and I was going to doctor's appointments constantly trying to figure out what was wrong with me because I was just convinced it was something physical. It had to be something physical. I even went so far as to subject myself to an MRI, which MRIs are a really fucking scary experience because I thought I had a brain tumor and I was having these like dizzy spells and whatever. And so my doctor finally sent me to get a brain MRI, which of course came up clean, but that didn't put my fears at rest either. It just, I was like, oh, well, I probably still have a brain tumor or an aneurysm or something, but they haven't seen it because they didn't use contrast, you know? Like, I tried all these different things to try to shut down the health fears and the health anxiety, but it's not rational. So no matter how many tests they did, I didn't trust the results, and I was still convinced that something was physically wrong with me because it felt like there was something physically wrong with me. Nothing put my fears at ease. I was constantly convinced that they had missed something, and that was kind of what it was like for that first year of my anxiety disorder. So now let's get into what my anxiety is like today, because some things have changed, but not everything. Some parts of my health anxiety I was able to just get over. I no longer have a persistent crushing fear of a cardiac or neurological event. I am no longer afraid of slipping in the shower, and I can take a shower even when I'm home alone, and I'm generally fine. At some point my life got so shit with the health anxiety that I started just telling myself I don't care. I started saying, I don't care if I have a heart attack, I don't care if I get a brain aneurysm, I don't care if I have a blood clot, I don't care if I slip and die in the shower because my life is so shit, like it's not worth living. Which is not really true, but that kind of mantra of I don't care and trying to trivialize and like dismiss those fears eventually did help a little bit to put them to rest. However, I still have a very huge and very irrational fear of losing control of my bodily functions. Mainly that means I'm afraid of throwing up in public, losing control of my bladder or bowels, needing a toilet and not having access to one. I'm afraid of fainting in public, and I'm generally just scared of having a panic attack in public as well. And of course those fears lead to a lot of severely limiting avoidance behaviors. So I hate being far away from a bathroom, and I try to avoid situations in which the bathroom accessibility is questionable. I avoid long drives because I'm afraid of getting motion sick and throwing up because of it. I refuse to get on a boat for the same reason. I don't take a lot of public transportation because of the lack of bathrooms, the fear of getting stranded or being in an accident or publicly embarrassing myself by puking or fainting or something on a train or a bus or whatever. And I do still get quite anxious and antsy in restaurants and in most public settings. I use a very common coping strategy for a lot of people with agoraphobia, which is trying to have a trusted person with me. So I do feel a little bit safer in public settings when I'm with someone I know and trust. But that does mean that there are a lot of things that I struggle to or avoid to do alone. I haven't taken a bus in like a year. I haven't gone anywhere out in the city to a mall or to a venue or to a concert or anything like that in probably like 8 or 9 years. I generally have to rely on others for almost everything pertaining to my mobility and getting from place to place, and I have almost no ability to move around independently. Now let's talk about some of the progress that I've made with my anxiety since it started. So I used to not leave my house at all unless I was absolutely forced to. I slowly started just getting far enough away from home to walk the dog, and now I walk the dog every day, so I have to leave the house at least a little bit every day. There are a few supermarkets and small shops that I've gotten comfortable with. I started out with only going there in the presence of someone else I know and trust, but if they're not too far away from home, there are a few stores that I am able to go inside and shop by myself. It's always better if they're smaller because then there's less time to the exit, or it's also better if they have bathrooms or if they have like little nooks within the supermarket where I can just like pause and stop and hide and take a breath. I can take the bus by myself for like 4 or 5 stops to the next town over. It's about 4 kilometers. It's like a 10-minute bus ride or so, but I still avoid it as much as possible because I still really don't like it, and it still takes me like hours of stressing about it and like hyping myself up to get on the bus to go anywhere, even if it's a really short bus ride. I basically have only like a 20 to 30 minute radius around each of my safe spaces that I'm willing to venture out in by myself. And what I mean by safe spaces is pretty much just my family's house where I live or my boyfriend's house. But these are all things that I couldn't do at all from like 2017 to 2019. Like I literally couldn't even go 5 minutes away from my house to walk my dog. I have to take a little break because my throat is suddenly very dry and very scratchy, and I'm coughing more than talking, so just give me a sec. I'm back with tea and hopefully a functional speaking voice. I really need to get a clip-on microphone so I don't have to talk so loud. This is tea. You don't like tea. She doesn't drink from her water bowl. She only drinks from my cup or her daddy's cup. Like, you have to have a human drinking cup available for her. There you go. There's water. You haven't drank any water today. Drink water. Nope. So these are all things that I couldn't do from 2017 to 2019, but to be honest, I haven't made much progress since then. I've kind of just secured a few of those small milestones and then didn't challenge myself further. I've gotten a little bit better about joining family activities and like going out with people to different places, but there's still a lot of things that I skip. If there's anything in my body that feels even a tiny little bit off, if I'm a little bit tired, if I have a little bit of indigestion but nothing serious, any little physical symptom is enough for me to cancel plans and stay home. To summarize the root issue, my anxiety can be summed up as the following two major themes: loss of control of bodily functions, and just the fear of fear, meaning the fear of having a panic attack. And ultimately, those two elements result in agoraphobia. So how did this all start? Moving on to the chapter that I have titled Toilet Phobia and Emetophobia. Starting off with the toilet phobia. So I grew up in China, and I had a very wide range of unpredictable experiences with toilets. Sometimes they were Western style toilets, sometimes they were the kind where you have to squat, sometimes they were very clean and very modern, and other times they were really dirty and gross and weird. At some point in my early teenage years, I became very anxious about the prospect of potentially having to use a disgusting, dirty, or very uncomfortable toilet. And I also hated the thought of people hearing me use the toilet. So I started trying to control my bodily functions and also to avoid situations where I might need to use the bathroom. So I would purposely not drink water and avoid eating so that I wouldn't need to use the toilet if I was traveling or on the go, if I was out in the city, or also if I was going to like a boyfriend's place, because I didn't want to go to the bathroom anywhere but home. And unfortunately, that theme has carried very much into present day, where I am just very concerned with the presence and availability of toilets and the kind of condition that they might be in. As for the roots of my emetophobia and the fear of losing control of my bodily functions, and again, these are all just theories because it's impossible to pinpoint an exact cause, but I was a pretty sickly child, like not chronically ill. I never had like one long-term illness, but I got a lot of those like early childhood diseases, those different viral diseases. I would get stomach bugs from school. I also was very prone to motion sickness and would like throw up during road trips on a lot of occasions that I can remember. So I just have like a lot of unpleasant memories of being sick when I was a child, and I always hated being sick and I always felt kind of embarrassed. You messed up my pillow. It was so nice. Can you please not mess up my pillow? I think Ellie wants to play, so I'm gonna take her to my sister so she can hang out with her and get her ball out and do something because I think she's bored. Okay, my plan backfired because Ellie gets excited, like overexcited, whenever my little sister picks her up, and then she peed on her carpet from happiness, so that didn't work out and now she's back. Where was I? So yeah, I had a lot of like early childhood diseases. There was a lot of vomiting, a lot of upset tummies, a lot of really unpleasant physical symptoms. I hated being sick and I felt really embarrassed being seen in that like vulnerable sick state. I got over the sickly stuff as I got older, and I think I forgot about it for years and it didn't really affect me, but at some point it just reared its ugly head and like transported me back to those memories and those feelings of loss of trust in my body and just feeling vulnerable and miserable and disgusting whenever I was sick. And all of those old feelings and fears of being sick, and especially publicly being sick, kind of came to a head in 2015 in what I believe was one of the inciting incidents that triggered the start of my anxiety in 2016 to 2017. So for years, I think I had an undiagnosed iron deficiency. There were several times at school and also when I had my period where I would just like black out. It would be like a pre-syncopal episode, like not full loss of consciousness, but I would just like see black in front of my eyes, or I would get really dizzy and feel like fainting, or I would even like vomit from weakness, especially during like the first few days of my period. And I was never diagnosed with anemia for years, but looking back, those were very clear symptoms. And then one day in 2015, it was summer, I had gone swimming with a friend, and then afterwards we went to a supermarket that had a food court, and we decided to get like ramen noodles at the food court. And we were sitting there eating, and she was telling me some story, and all of a sudden my heart started racing. I got tunnel vision. My hearing was kind of muffled. I was instantly covered in this like clammy cold sweat. I felt dizzy, I felt nauseous, I felt weak. I now know that it was a pre-syncopal episode, so not fully fainting, but being on the verge of fainting. And it was only a few moments, but I remember so viscerally the feeling of fear and panic that washed over me in that moment, and all of the thoughts that were racing through my head. It was like, oh my god, what's gonna happen? I feel like I'm gonna vomit. What if I vomit in this restaurant? Everyone is gonna be so disgusted. I'm gonna put them off their food. I knew there was a bathroom nearby in the food court, but I thought if I get up and I try to go to the bathroom, what if they think I'm trying to dine and dash? And I had been to that bathroom before, and I had refused to use it because I remembered that it smelled bad and the floors were sticky and it was dirty and uncomfortable and gross. So in that moment, I was thinking, what if I run out of here to avoid puking in this restaurant, and instead I end up puking or passing out on that dirty, disgusting, piss-covered, sticky floor? I felt completely out of control and so terrified and so vulnerable. Luckily, my friend was there, and I told her immediately that something's going on, I'm really not feeling well. And this supermarket happened to be right next door to the building of the private health clinic that I was a patient at. And so as that like initial wave of just literally tunnel vision, muffled hearing, and nausea washed over me, and I felt a little bit better, like just good enough to stand, my friend then helped me up, and we walked like the 2 to 3 minutes that it took to get to the clinic building, and we went to the clinic. It wasn't really a hospital, but they were luckily not that busy and were able to take me in right away. By the time we were sitting in the waiting room, I was feeling pretty much fine again, if just really shaken. But that day I saw my doctor, and they did a blood test, and they found out I was severely anemic, and they put me on iron supplements. Emotionally, I don't think it hit me right away. You know, I took my supplements, and I was actually just kind of angry about the whole thing. Like, why did it take so long to realize that I had anemia, and why did I have to go through that, you know? But I was acutely aware of how lucky I had been that it happened in the presence of a friend, close to hospital and close to home. At the time, I was all over the city, hours away from home, for hours every day, all by myself. Obviously, I started developing this fear of like, what if something like this happened when I was far from home among strangers? I pushed through it, I kept going, but I slowly started to feel less safe in my body, less safe being out and about by myself, less safe being out on stage and performing, because again, I was a singer, I was in bands at the time, I was, you know, frequently in front of audiences of like 200 people, no problem. But when something like that happens, you start being afraid. So that event happened in the summer of 2015, and it was another year and a half before I developed full-blown health anxiety, by which point the anemia that had caused those symptoms was pretty much completely resolved, but my body remembered the trauma, the fear, that out of control feeling. And so I think that's a large part of what triggered the issues that I'm currently dealing with. And also, as a side note, unrelated to the toilet thing, but in 2016 I was also involved in a minor car accident. I wasn't seriously injured, but I was sitting in the back seat without a seatbelt on because a lot of taxis in Shanghai when I was growing up didn't have seatbelts in the back, and I just never got into the habit of wearing my seatbelt, so I flew forward into the seat in front of me, and like I bruised my arm and my knee pretty badly and had like a little bit of like a friction burn on my cheek. It was nothing bad, but I think the car accident potentially also contributed to my general sense of vulnerability and just like the world being unpredictable. So all of those factors bring us onto the whole agoraphobia thing. Because when you're constantly afraid of losing control of your body and embarrassing yourself and being perceived as disgusting, of course your instinct is to hide. And when you've had panic attacks in the past and you know how awful they feel, and you also know that in the moment you are not able to rationally think your way out of it and instead you'll just catastrophize every symptom, then of course you want to avoid the situations that could potentially trigger a panic attack. So agoraphobia develops out of that coping mechanism of avoiding your triggers. I haven't actually had a full-blown panic attack in a pretty long time, but that's only because I've avoided the situations that trigger them so effectively, which kind of makes it worse because now I'm out of practice of dealing with panic attacks, which makes them even more terrifying. Agoraphobia is really difficult for people to understand because it's like, how can you just be afraid of like walking down the street, going to a store, being out in public and doing normal things? The definition of agoraphobia is extreme or irrational fear of entering open or crowded places, of leaving one's own home, or of being in places from which escape is difficult. And that last part about escape being difficult is what really stands out, because I'm not technically afraid of walking down the street. I'm afraid that I will have a panic attack while I'm walking down the street and not have a safe place where I can hide until I calm myself down. I'm not technically afraid of being in a bus or on a train. I'm afraid that I will experience tummy problems while I'm on a bus or train and not have access to a toilet where I can, you know, go until I feel better. I constantly feel the need for a place that I can escape to or a place that I can hide in, and in most cases that would be like a bathroom. So the further I am from a bathroom, basically, the more anxious I feel, especially if there's a lot of people around who could potentially witness my fear, my discomfort, my irrational behavior, or, you know, any imagined embarrassing scenarios that I might find myself in. So what makes agoraphobia so debilitating and so different from other phobias? Most people have some phobias, right? They have a fear of snakes or water or heights or a fear of flying. But the difference is most common phobias do not affect your daily functioning, and they're not things that you have to be confronted with every single day. But in the case of agoraphobia, going outside and existing in the world and doing normal everyday things is something that functional humans are supposed to do and expected to be able to do. But when you have agoraphobia, all of those normal everyday human experiences are shrouded under a constant cloud of just terror and panic and fear of losing control. So how has agoraphobia affected my life? Well, in a lot of ways, as you could probably imagine. I've skipped out on family trips because I was afraid of the long drive or of having to be on a ferry boat. I once didn't go to Disneyland with my family in Shanghai, although I did go to Disneyland for my sister's birthday about a year or two later, so I did end up braving that fear eventually. But I've also missed a lot of my little sister's singing performances and dance recitals when she was younger. I haven't been to a mall or an event or done like a little day trip by myself in like 8 years. I couldn't face doing an in-person university even if I wanted to, and it's just generally very difficult to make progress and move forward in life. For example, I haven't had a job since 2020. I briefly worked in a supermarket part-time, 4 hours a day from October 2019 to March of 2020. I eventually had to quit because I couldn't fall asleep thinking about having to go to work the next day. I was constantly sick. I was constantly stressed. I felt so like physically exhausted despite the fact that I was only working 4 hours a day. It just took everything out of me to be out in public and working for those 4 hours and like trying to keep the anxiety at bay. People don't realize how physically exhausting it is to recover from anxious situations when you have an anxiety disorder. Like the adrenaline really takes it out of you, and like trying to dissipate that adrenaline, trying to keep the adrenaline at bay, it is so incredibly draining, like I cannot even describe. So it really, like, for me, puts me at very high risk of just getting sick, feeling tired, and suffering symptoms of burnout, basically. So when I had that job, I just felt constantly drained and overwhelmed. Since 2020, I've been trying to pick up as much work as I can online and make money that way, but it's not very consistent and I really don't earn enough. I would like to get another part-time job just for the financial stability, but at the same time, I don't want to. There's plenty of reasons why. You know, I have ADHD, so I don't thrive in a normal work environment. I have a sleep disorder, so I don't thrive in normal working hours. But the worst part and the hardest part for me is actually physically getting to work, because even if it's just like a 15-minute bus ride, for example, those 15 minutes are like my worst nightmare. It's a kind of stress that I can put myself through occasionally, but doing it every single day is like a really fast path to burnout for me. Because whenever I'm on the way between locations, you know, there's no access to bathrooms, anything unexpected can happen. It's not a safe place for me. I just feel like I'm out in the world alone with no escape path and no one to help me in case of an emergency or if I'm not feeling well. The way I would describe it is getting to work as a person with agoraphobia is like if someone who is claustrophobic had to get to work by like riding in a coffin, you know? Or if someone with a fear of heights would have to do like a 20-minute trek on a glass bridge to get to their place of work. If you had to confront your biggest fear just to get to work every day, how long would it take before you were completely burnt out, lost your shit, and just decided it was not worth it to you anymore? And this is where I definitely think being able to drive to work in my own car would make things easier, because my car could potentially become like an extended safe space and like a place where I felt a bit more in control, and also a place where I could like hide and calm down. But first I would have to get the money for the driver's license, then I'd have to get the money for the car, then I would have to sit through the trainings and the tests and the first aid classes in, you know, classrooms and situations which you are not supposed to leave and is very much like a not easily escapable situation for me. I actually had an opportunity to get a driver's license when I was 20, and a big part of the reason why I didn't go through with it was because I was too scared of the prospect of having to sit in the exam room to do like the written test and not being able to leave the room until I finished the test, because that would make me feel completely trapped, which is a really huge trigger for agoraphobia, which really sucks because I do think being able to drive myself places would give me some level of control and make a lot of things a bit easier. Okay, so I've pretty much covered what it's like living with anxiety and agoraphobia, how it started, what kind of triggered it, and how it affects my life. Now, where do I go from here? I know that avoiding my fears forever is not an option, and I also don't want to avoid my fears forever. I want to be able to drive. I want to be able to work. I want to be able to go places by myself. I want to be able to travel. I want to have fun, do the things I used to enjoy, maybe even get back out on stage again, which right now feels impossible and insurmountable, but it is such a huge dream and such a huge passion of mine. I definitely haven't made much progress with my agoraphobia since about 2020, and there are both need-based and want-based reasons why I need to start making progress on this again. I am in talk therapy, but it hasn't been very focused on exposure therapy and like actionable steps. There are very few therapists who do offer like in-person support for exposure therapy, so a lot of it would have to be self-guided and unassisted, which can be really difficult and feels very risky. Meanwhile, I just keep trying to make money online from home, from my safe space, but the thing is, I don't want to be stuck at home forever. Even if I manage to build my dream business, my dream successful YouTube channel, and like start doing 10K months online from within these four walls, I would not want to stay within these four walls. I would want to take that money and like go out into the world, go travel, go have fun and experience things, not be stuck at home afraid to go to the shopping mall by myself. No matter what I choose to do with my life, I can't have the life I want without getting this under control. It definitely feels like I've wasted the last 8 years of my life, like I've lost the best years of my life, the years when I should have been getting an education, building a career, earning money, and saving and investing, to this mental illness. I know it's not my fault, but it's also a really unique kind of grief, and it feels like I'll be trying to play catch up for the rest of my life. But I also know that life is long and it doesn't have to end the same way. My journey in adulthood doesn't have to continue going the same way that it kind of began. I started the idea of 365 Days Brave because I wanted to document my journey, and I think it's time I start pursuing it again. I've realized that all roads lead back to this, and I've felt stuck for such a long time, and it's time to get unstuck. So this year I will be focusing on starting to make progress with my agoraphobia again and documenting that journey on 365 Days Brave in hopes that it will help uplift and inspire and connect other people struggling with agoraphobia, and also help more people to understand. So subscribe to 365 Days Brave if you want to follow my anxiety recovery journey. Subscribe to Hexa Angel if you want to learn more about who I am outside of mental illness. Thank you for watching and listening to my story, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye.